Hello, I did an interview for an online New Orleans podcast radio program the other night about my books. And one of the subjects that came up was a discussion of the genius loci, the old Roman notion of the spirit of place. And certainly in one of my books, the anthology of short crime stories, they're all set in the same place but stretched out over many, many centuries. One of the sort of connecting themes of the short stories in that book is the idea that people are exposed to a spirit of place, and the spirit of that particular place is rather a malevolent one. And so it kind of brings out the worst in people. Decent people are kind of put off of wanting to be there. They're made to feel ill, and they tend not to stay very long. They go away. The people who dig their heels in and are happy to reside there are ones of a similar temperament to the spirit of place. So they're kind of corrupt to start with, but the kind of idea of the story is they become more corrupt as a result of the exposure to this spirit. And that as an idea, although it was just a bit of literary whimsy for the stories, I do think is actually a valid notion, a valid concept, that spirit of place, and I think this has been recognised by the Romans, obviously, but also the Greeks, the Celts, the Slavs, the Balts, the Norse, probably everybody on the planet pretty much over the course of millennia, that certain places do have a very noticeable spirit. And arguably probably all places have some kind of a spirit, but maybe certain ones of those spirits are a lot more obvious, a lot more noticeable than others are. And that long-term exposure to them, living in the remit, in the presence of a given spirit of place for years and years and years, or maybe working there, if you kind of spend a large chunk of your working life in the presence of a particular spirit of place, has an impact upon the individual. And I think that can be a healthy impact if it's a very benevolent, supportive, nurturing spirit of place, or it can be a very destructive one if the spirit of place either just thoroughly dislikes you for whatever reason, or indeed is a malevolent entity that seeks out other malevolent corporeal beings to to partake of malice with. So I think you can have ones that partake of benefice and ones that partake of malice, and so whether it long-term improves you or long-term corrupts you, or maybe it has some other more neutral effect over the individual over the course of many years, I think that is very much of an actual force. Now, it does pose some interesting possible angles to go down and to think about, in that we could argue, is there I'm not saying a removal of moral culpability, but let's say I stuff my face with cream cakes for the next 50 years. Well, I'm going to live another 50 years. So I stuff my face with cream cakes for the next 30 years, and I get gargantuanly obese. My health goes to pot. I am morally culpable for the state my health gets into. However, if there is an entity, or a feeder, I think is the correct word for the sort of weird sexual practices of people who have an obsession with feeding up their partners until they get massively obese and frequently extremely ill and unable to move, and all sorts of other rather unpleasant side effects. If there were an entity, now whether that entity is another human being with weird sexual appetites, or whether that entity is some more incorporeal presence, in either direction, although you can probably argue there is a more overt moral responsibility where it is another physical person, another human being, because you know they're there, you know that they're egging you on to do certain things, and it's up to you whether you give in to them or whether you tell them to shut the hell up and go away and stop bothering you. Whereas if it's a presence that you might not yourself be aware of, because perhaps you don't pick up on these things, or at least if you do, it's only in a very nebulous sort of a way, and you're not really quite consciously sure what actually is there, then you wouldn't necessarily know it's having an effect on you. It'd be a bit like living next to I don't know, a leaking nuclear dump where you've got no idea there's radiation coming out of it and affecting you, and so you get sicker and sicker, and you don't know why you're getting sicker and sicker because you don't realise the radiation is there. So you could be in the presence of something that's making you a more unpleasant person, or it's making you a nicer person for that matter, and you don't realise it's having that effect on you because you're not twigging to it. So if you become a nicer person, is it entirely down to your own inner decency and your hard work and self-improvement, or is it just the sheer good luck, fluke, whatever you want to call it, of happening to be near something that has this very salutogenic effect on you and makes you a better person? And therefore maybe you, whether or not you deserve quite such a pat on the back for being a decent sort, or whether you just get, a smaller pat on the back because you're more lucky than you are industrious, I'm not sure. But equally, you could say in the negative direction, if somebody doesn't realise that they're being morally corrupted and depraved by some presence, and they get worse and worse and they do nastier and nastier things, is it wholly their fault if there is a presence doing it to them? And I don't quite know where to go with that one, because it's not very far removed from those rather dubious characters who sometimes stand up in the court when they're being arraigned for some crime or another and go, "Oh, the devil made me do it." And, well, did he make you do it? I mean, I'm hardly an expert on Christian theology, but the devil in Christianity's attempter, certainly, sort of stands behind you and goes, "Oh, do it, do it, do it, go on, go on," but doesn't force people to do it. At the end of the day, they choose to give in to temptation. They're not gunned to the head and forced to do it. I suppose the worst you could say is they get a bit worn down by the constant drip, drip, drip effect of somebody standing behind them going, "Kill him, kill him, kill him," until eventually one day they do it. Does it take away their moral responsibility for giving in to something which they know they should not give in to? No, I don't think so. From a legal point of view, clearly it's no defence in court to say the devil made me do it, or the genius loci made me do it. But from a more therapeutic point of view, if you're trying to rehabilitate somebody, trying to help them, trying to redeem them, if you want to put it into a Christian context, then maybe they are not as morally culpable as someone who wholeheartedly, willingly, of their own volition, throws themselves into a terrible act. You could tie yourself in knots endlessly on that one, couldn't you? I suppose most people who end up doing dreadful things have had some influences pushing them towards it. Not necessarily things with forked tails and wings or whatever, but people hanging out with the wrong kind of friends and all that sort of thing, pushing them in certain directions, and maybe they've been quite eager to receive the pushing and run in those directions, but there is always that sort of slightly grey area. And thinking in terms of redeeming people and helping people, then for those, I was going to say those pagans, but obviously it's not just pagans, Shintoists, Taoists, many Hindus, people from a great many religions that wouldn't necessarily call themselves pagan, but share certain ideas around spiritual presences in the physical world, would perhaps take these ideas on board as well, and articulate them far more effectively than I am at the moment. That if you were going to set up a clinic, or place of healing, shall we say, in a broader sense, a place where people can go to receive counselling and aid to whether it's dealing with addictions or overcoming their moral vices and problems of whatever sort, then you would be advised, I think, to find a place whose resident spirit is already benevolent and therapeutic and geared towards that sort of healing experience. we have, I think, an attitude in the West, and probably you'd find it quite widespread in the East these days. Not that I've travelled in the East, but I expect you would probably find it over there as much in this day and age. That we put buildings where is convenient, sort of more to do with things like land prices and stuff like that, than any great spiritual consideration as to the presence of spirits. Although I'm told in Japan there are more tendencies to get people in to read the land and help with the siting of buildings from a more spiritual perspective, rather than it being a purely pragmatic economic decision. So there are perhaps places where this is less of an issue than it is in the West. But again, coming back to this notion that certain places radiate certain presences, if you want to put a building with an explicit function in mind from the moment it's built, then finding a place where the spirit, the genius of the place, the essence of the place is in harmony with the intent that building is to have, makes, from a pagan point of view and Shintoist, Taoist, etc., point of view, makes far more sense than just plonking it willy-nilly wherever and hoping that somehow the building will serve the purpose regardless of where it's put, because there are going to be some places that are more conducive to certain purposes than they are to other purposes. And a bit like a carpenter understands that you feel the grain of the wood, and if you're going to make a bit of furniture or carve a wooden statue or whatever it is, you go with the grain of the wood rather than against the grain of the wood. Otherwise, you're going to have a much harder time of it. And so the genius Loci, the spirit, is a bit, in a sense, I suppose, a bit like the grain of the wood. It's something you are working with and sensing, and trying to adapt your needs to its needs, so that you harmonise together, rather than going against its needs. Now, having said right at the start that probably everywhere has a spirit of place, I'm not wholly sure that is true, actually. I mean, it may have been true once that pretty much everywhere had spirit, but I'm reminded of T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland, which obviously is based upon Arthurian myth and the notion of the wasteland there that has to be restored with the discovery of the Holy Grail. That I think probably chiefly through human action, although not necessarily exclusively through human action, maybe through other forms of entities having actions as well, that places can be denuded of spirit. I've certainly been to places that felt completely empty. Now, that could just be me, of course, misreading a situation. But I do think there are places that whatever was there once is no longer there now. And they feel empty. There is a sort of a void, a nothingness. And there is, of course, the old adage about nature abhorring a vacuum. And so sooner or later something will flood in to fill it. Not necessarily always the kind of thing you might want to flood in to fill it, but impossibility. So there is a sense, perhaps, in which spirits relocate. So if a place is voided and another spirit is feeling homeless, as it were, no longer wants to be in the geographic location it used to be in for a variety of reasons, then it might relocate to one of these voided places and change the context. I think working, kind of overlaying with these ideas, partly what I'm thinking about, I think of various places I've been to over the years, that some of them had absolutely lovely, wonderful atmospheres, and some of them were just horrible, unpleasant, hostile atmospheres. And sometimes that can be tracked back to discernible events. People talk about visiting battlefields and places of horrific tragedy and being kind of very weighed down by the atmospheric presence of the tragedy. that perhaps there are significant key events that can, no matter what spirit was there beforehand, and whatever its character and temperament was, that this event happens. And it could be as readily a really lovely event as a really horrible event, but a major significant event happens that changes the tenor of the place. And perhaps the spirit that was there no longer wants to be there because this event has so changed the presence, it is no longer comfortable being there and it goes elsewhere. Or it may be, kind of within a similar vein, but perhaps a little bit less melodramatic. A spirit of place may be very much part of a specific environment, a forest spirit or a river spirit, something like that. And if the river gets drained or the forest gets chopped down or burnt down in a forest fire or whatever, and the environment that the spirit existed within is no longer there, it may wait around a while in the hope that the environment comes back, the forest regrows, the river, come the next heavy rains, the river reforms or whatever. But perhaps after a while, if the environment does not come back, then eventually the spirit, what does it do? Does it die? Does it adapt? Does it move on and find a new forest or a new river or a new whatever? I don't know. I mean, it's purely speculation, but I think there is that room there for things to move about, to shift and turn, perhaps, and people to bring spirits with them. And part of talking this evening at a meeting over in Felixstowe, Trimley, which is a village near Felixstowe, about Roman paganism. And obviously you've got notions like the Lares, the Penates, the Manes, entities which are quite often more attached to families than they are to geographic locations. So if the family moves, the spirit goes with them. Often this is reflective of a period of history when whole families would move together, which these days obviously families frequently break up with, either children grow up, move out of home, parents divorce, whatever, go in different directions. So how that kind of guardian spirit copes these days when a family might be spread over a massive geographic area rather than located entirely in one household, I'm not quite sure. But there is also that element in which it may not only be the spirit in the place may not only be of the geographic place, there may be spirits to do with the humans or indeed the non-humans within a particular area, like a guardian spirit of cattle or a guardian spirit of bears or wolves or owls or whatever it might be, that it watches over the entities, the creatures living in a particular location. And if the creatures move, the entity moves with them. Speaking of bears, there's a lovely story I came across years and years and years ago about the Uldra Mother, who up in Norway, if I'm going by memory now, I think it was Norway, basically sort of babysits, bear sits, cub sits, I'm not quite sure what you'd call it, bears during the winter months when they're asleep. So it sort of hovers over the hibernating bears and takes care of them, which I just think that's a lovely image. So yes, talking of guardian spirits of bears, that's what I had in mind, the Uldra Mother looking after the sleeping bears. So yes, there's perhaps a whole variety of spirits, either of place or at least temporarily resident in a place, that people might encounter, and if they spend a prolonged period of time there, will have an impact on them for good or for ill, which is obviously a strong advisement to be very careful and try to exercise wise judgment in the places you spend a lot of time in. Obviously, we don't always have a massive amount of choice in that, because finances may dictate where you live. You may have to work somewhere that isn't your first choice of place, but you can't get another job anywhere else. And so you might end up spending a long time in a factory, a shop, a hospital, a school, or whatever it is somebody works in, exposed to the spirits of that place, which may be having an effect, a nice effect or a bad effect, or excuse me, an indifferent effect. In terms of indifferent ones, that's perhaps not the best word to use. It may be that they develop personal qualities which are neither morally desirable nor wicked. They're just skills, talents of a neutral variety that could be put to good or put to ill. So people might get gradually more intelligent, or they might get gradually more critical, or gradually more artistic, or gradually more industrious, or whatever it might be, which again could have a good or a bad or an indifferent outcome for the individual. Whereas other traits might be more overtly moral, things like cruelty and so on, kindness, things like that. I really don't know where I'm going with this. But just a thought on the nature of the spirit of place and the importance of exercising as much control as your finances and circumstances allow you to exercise over the places we spend prolonged periods of time. And so upon going to a place, whether it's looking at a new home or a flat you're going to rent or whatever it might be, or if you're lucky enough to have the choice between several possible jobs, and you can go to the interviews, and they usually show you around the place that they want you to work in, that one of the things you have in mind is not only, how much will I be paid, and when's the lunch break, or does this place need redecorating or not, the kind of usual pragmatic things that people think about when they're looking at a new home or a new job, but to also be spiritually awake and attuned, and to think, who is already here? Is there a spirit in this house? In this factory, this shop, this office, this whatever it is that I'm getting a job in, are there spirits, aside from the human beings, are there spirits here within the building? And are they likely to be friendly or unfriendly, beneficial or harmful? Bit difficult if you're being taken around on a job interview to say, excuse me a minute whilst I sit and have a Mystic Meg moment. So you'd have to do it fairly subtly, or pretend you've got to use the loo and then do your meditations in there. But to tune in and to be sensitive to what is present, to get a sense of its character, of whether it wants you there or not, of whether it would make you a better person or a worse person, whether you would make it better or worse for that matter is two-way street. But to think about those issues as part of life, rather than have them as the kind of thing you only discover several months down the line after you've paid the deposit on the property or agreed to do the job, and then later on think, oh shit, I don't like this, something horrible is in the woodshed, it's coming for me. But to be open to enjoying, or finding places you can enjoy, whether to live in or to work in or to study in, for that matter. If you're going to spend 3 years of your life doing a degree, or longer than that even, in a building, it needs to be a building you're comfortable in, you're happy in, where you feel welcomed by the entities that live there. So just to think in terms of context of the other beings who inhabit space and how we interrelate with them. Thank you.